Imagine this. You're lying awake at 2:17 a.m. The room is silent, yet your thoughts scream like a siren behind your eyes. You've checked your phone 6 times in the past minute. You're not looking for anything, just hoping to distract yourself from that slow, rising anxiety that has no name. You don't even know what you're afraid of. But it's there. Heavy, invisible, haunting. So you scroll, you consume, you escape. But somewhere beneath all the noise, a quiet thought leaks through. What if you're afraid of your own mind, not just the stray thoughts, not just the doubts or the unfinished to-do list, but your actual mind, the raw, unfiltered labyrinth of memories, fantasies, pain, contradictions, and untamed desires that live just beneath the surface. You sense there's something in there you don't want to meet. And so, like a seasoned fugitive, you run. You call it keeping busy. You call it ambition. You call it being productive or moving on or staying positive. But underneath the mantras and affirmations, the truth lingers like a shadow at your back. You don't want to be alone with yourself. Why? Because the mind is not a sanctuary. It is a battlefield, a hall of mirrors where every mask you wear eventually cracks. It stores everything you tried to forget, every betrayal, every failure, every secret impulse you swore wasn't you. What if your anxiety isn't a problem with the world, but a signal that you've abandoned some part of yourself inside that mental dungeon? What if depression isn't always just a chemical imbalance, but the weight of truths you've refused to face? We love to pretend that fear comes from outside the collapsing economy, a pandemic, losing someone we love, the end of the world. But what if the most terrifying apocalypse is the one inside you, a slow erosion of self-awareness, a subtle rejection of your past, an unconscious war against your own depth? We wear distractions like armor, content, work, relationships, causes, not because we're shallow, but because depth hurts, because silence echoes, because stillness brings up the voices we've tried so hard to bury. Have you noticed? You can binge watch a series about murder, but can't sit still for 10 minutes with your own thoughts. You can share your trauma in a meme, but panic when you're actually vulnerable. You can meditate, but only if an app tells you when and how. Why? Because the untrained mind isn't peaceful, it's dangerous. Left alone, it drifts toward the unresolved, toward the primitive, toward the buried parts of you that never got to speak. The parts you've learned to label as crazy, too much, or not enough. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Think about that. Anything. Work 60-hour weeks. Jump from relationship to relationship. Scroll endlessly through curated fantasies of other people's lives. Create gods. Create enemies. Create entire belief systems just to make sure you never have to look within. What if the reason you're exhausted isn't because you're doing too much, but because you're constantly running from yourself? Here's the paradox. You want peace, but you're terrified of stillness. You crave meaning, but avoid introspection. You long for healing, but won't touch the wound. We've been conditioned to believe the mind is either a tool to master or a problem to fix. But what if it's a mystery to explore? What if the mind isn't just where you think, but where you're hiding? And here's the great unsettling question. What would happen if you stopped running, not from your job, not from the news, but from your own mind? If you sat in silence long enough to hear what it's really saying, if you allowed the chaos to speak, not to be controlled or analyzed but witnessed, would you unravel, or would you finally for the first time see who you actually are beneath the noise? Because maybe, just maybe, fear is not the enemy. Maybe fear is the doorway, the invitation, the mirror. And maybe the reason you're afraid of your own mind is because it knows something about you that you've forgotten, something the world doesn't want you to remember. There's a strange contradiction at the heart of modern life. You are taught to trust your thoughts, yet you're terrified of where they lead. You are raised to believe in free will, yet you often feel hijacked by feelings you can't explain. You are told to be yourself, but no one ever teaches you who that is or where to find it. Instead, you're trained from a very early age to perform, to suppress, to adapt, to survive. And that's where the problem begins. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask you wear to fit into the world. It's the version of yourself you craft so that people will like you, trust you, respect you. You become a curated identity, obedient, charismatic, clever, kind, impressive. But here's the cost. Every time you choose the mask over the truth, a part of you goes underground. It doesn't die. It just sinks into the unconscious where it begins to fester. Jung called this the shadow, the rejected parts of your psyche. Not just your rage, jealousy, or fear, but also your unlived potential, your buried instincts, your primal truths. And the more you push these parts away, the more alien your own mind becomes. The more your internal world feels like a threat. This isn't just psychology, it's survival. As a child, you learned what parts of yourself were acceptable. Maybe you were praised for being quiet and punished for being angry. Maybe you were told not to cry, not to speak up, not to question too much. You were conditioned to believe that being loved meant being less of yourself, so you split. A part of you became the good child. Another part, unseen, unloved, became the ghost in your mind. And ghosts don't disappear. They whisper. They show up as anxiety, depression, addiction, or compulsive perfectionism. They sabotage your relationships. They trap you in cycles of self-doubt. They make you terrified of silence, because silence is where they speak. You see, the problem isn't just that your mind contains darkness. The problem is that you were never taught how to face it. Our culture doesn't reward introspection. It rewards production. It doesn't teach you to understand your shadow. It teaches you to numb it. From an early age, you're taught to fix your thoughts with dopamine likes, distractions, substances, screens. The modern self is an algorithm constantly updated to avoid discomfort. You scroll not because you're curious, but because you're avoiding the moment when the mirror becomes too clear. In this way, society becomes your unconscious. You download beliefs you never chose. You inherit fears from your parents, politics from your peers, morality from your media. And all of it piles up like debris on your psyche until your own mind becomes a stranger's voice. Nietzsche once warned that he who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. But what happens when the monster is within? We live in a time where people treat inner silence like a threat. Every empty moment must be filled, every waiting room, every walk, every second between actions. Noise has become a form of anesthesia. And underneath it all, the one thing no one wants to admit. We're not afraid of external chaos. We're afraid of internal truth. Because once you look at yourself, truly look, you might realize you've been living someone else's life. That you built your world not on desire, but on avoidance. That your goals were driven by fear. That your entire sense of self is a performance. This is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The real prison isn't the outside world, it's the unexamined mind. And most people never leave it, not because they can't, but because the first step to liberation is terrifying. You have to face yourself. You have to sit with the parts you hate, the parts you were told were unlovable, the memories that don't fit your narrative, the impulses that frighten you, the questions that unravel everything you were taught to believe. This is the initiation every thinker, mystic, or rebel has endured. Søren Kierkegaard called it the sickness unto death, the despair of not being your true self. Schopenhauer described the human condition as a wheel of endless craving and dissatisfaction, always circling around what we cannot have yet can never stop wanting. Sartre said that freedom itself is terrifying because it strips away excuses. It forces you to confront the void and make meaning from the raw material of your choices. And Aldous Huxley warned of something even worse than totalitarianism, a society so addicted to comfort and distraction that it forgets the self even exists. We are not born afraid of our minds. We are trained to fear them because our minds contain truths that threaten the systems we've built. If you knew how powerful you really were, if you reconnected to your forgotten instincts, your deepest visions, your ancient fears and wild dreams, you might stop playing the game. You might stop obeying. You might stop pretending. And that's dangerous. Not to your soul, but to the structure that profits from your disconnection. Because a person who isn't afraid of their own mind is almost impossible to control. There's a particular kind of suffering that doesn't scream. It doesn't show up in headlines. It doesn't draw sympathy. It hides behind perfectly filtered photos, clever sarcasm, and the polite answers we give when someone asks how we're doing. It's the silent ache of being disconnected from your own mind. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way, no padded cells or wild outbursts. Just a quiet, gnawing emptiness. A sense that you're drifting through life busy but aimless, surrounded by noise but strangely alone. You get things done. You meet deadlines. You smile at the right times. But deep down, there's a persistent feeling you can't name. A feeling like something is missing. Like you are missing. And this is the first great consequence of fearing your own mind. You become a stranger to yourself. The average person spends the majority of their waking hours engaged in distraction. Not out of laziness or lack of willpower, but out of avoidance. The moment we slow down, the thoughts start creeping in. What am I doing with my life? Why do I feel like a fraud? Why can't I stop comparing myself to others? These are not thoughts that break us. They're thoughts that could save us if we'd only listen, but we don't. Instead, we reach for another shot of dopamine, a screen, a snack, a scroll. The mind, untended and unexplored, becomes background noise, a constant hum we've learned to tune out. And yet it controls everything. Cognitive psychologists have shown that up to 95% of our behavior is unconscious. We believe we're making rational choices, but in truth, we are often acting out scripts we didn't write. Scripts written by trauma, by upbringing, by social conditioning. You choose the job that feels secure because failure terrifies you. You chase status because your worth was once tied to performance. You stay in toxic relationships because you've confused chaos with love. You self-sabotage right before you succeed because success would challenge your entire identity. These aren't just bad habits. They are the residues of a mind unexamined. And the more you avoid your inner world, the more it becomes a labyrinth twisting with fears you don't understand and impulses you can't control. But here's the twist. This avoidance isn't neutral. It has a cost. Every part of yourself you exile eventually turns against you. The shadow becomes more aggressive, the dreams more disturbing, the addictions more intense, the anxiety more chronic. The mind begins to leak like a dam cracking under the pressure of everything you refuse to feel. You might start experiencing this as a kind of inner chaos mood, swings, unexplained fatigue, numbness, compulsions. Or worse, a haunting sense that no matter what you achieve, nothing really matters. Because how can anything truly matter if you're not there to experience it? This is the second consequence. Emotional deadness. The fear of facing your mind doesn't just bury your pain. It buries your joy, your curiosity, your aliveness. Emotions don't work like light switches. You can't numb the bad and expect to keep the good. When you shut yourself off from grief, you also lose wonder. When you avoid shame, you lose the capacity for deep intimacy. Over time, your inner world becomes flat, predictable, safe, yes, but sterile. You begin to live only on the surface, functioning but not feeling, performing but not connecting, alive but not awake. And then comes the third most dangerous consequence. You become easily controlled. Not in the Orwellian sense. No big brother, no forced ideology. Just nudged invisibly and constantly by systems that understand your mind better than you do. Tech companies know how long you'll look at a photo of your ex. Political strategists know which fears will get you to vote a certain way. Advertisers know that if they hit the right insecurity, you'll buy anything. Because you've abandoned your inner life, others have moved in, and they know something you don't, that your attention is currency, that your emotions are leverage, that your beliefs can be edited if you're distracted enough not to notice. This isn't paranoia. It's the logical outcome of a culture that prizes comfort over consciousness. As long as you fear your own mind, you'll let others define it for you. As long as you avoid your inner voice, you'll follow louder ones. As long as you reject your own truth, you'll sell your soul for a version of truth that isn't yours. You don't need to be in chains to be a prisoner. All it takes is fear and silence. Silence when something doesn't feel right. Silence when your intuition screams no. Silence when the deepest parts of you whisper, wake up. But this silence is not neutral. It's an ecosystem of suppression, one that breeds stagnation, conformity, spiritual fatigue. Philosophers have warned us for centuries. Plato said the unexamined life is not worth living. Marcus Aurelius urged us to master our minds or become mastered by them. Jean-Paul Sartre taught that when we refuse to choose who we are, we let society choose for us. And yet, here we are, billions of us staring into glowing rectangles chasing 1,000 versions of success that never satisfy while the most essential truth goes unspoken. You are not at war with the world. You are at war with yourself. And it is a quiet war, a slow war, but one that bleeds into everything, your decisions, your relationships, your sense of purpose, until you either wake up or go numb, until you either rebel or resign. You're not broken. You were simply never shown how to listen to yourself. Not really. Because if you had dared to sit in the quiet to open the forbidden door to meet the stranger within you, would have found something that society doesn't want you to know. You already contain the cure for your fear. But first, you have to rebel, not against society, in the way of slogans and marches, but in the way that's far more radical and far more terrifying. You must rebel against your conditioning, against the idea that you are small, that you are fragile, that you are dangerous to yourself. Because here's the truth, most people never hear, your mind is not your enemy. Your fear, your anger, your shame, these are not signs of weakness. They are signals, gateways, invitations to wholeness. Carl Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this is the essence of the rebellion, not to suppress the shadow, but to befriend it. This isn't a poetic metaphor, it's a daily practice, a new relationship with the self. It begins with silence, not the numbing kind, the sacred kind, the kind that allows the buried voices to rise. At first, it will feel unbearable. Your mind will thrash. Your impulses will scream for a distraction. You'll feel like you're losing control. You're not. You're just meeting yourself for the first time without the filters. And when you do, you might be surprised by what you find. That the anger you've buried for years holds a truth you were never allowed to speak. That the anxiety you despise is actually a compass warning you when you betray yourself. That the grief you avoid is love that was never allowed to breathe. In this rebellion, nothing is wasted. Every emotion, every scar, every self-sabotaging thought, they're not enemies. They are exiled parts of you desperate to return home. And to bring them back, you must stop asking, how do I get rid of this, and start asking, what is this trying to teach me? It's not easy. In fact, it's brutal. You will lose your illusions. You will grieve your false identities. You will confront the terrifying possibility that much of what you called you was just armor. But what you gain is freedom. Not the shallow freedom of doing whatever you want. The real kind. The kind that comes from seeing clearly, from no longer lying to yourself. Because once you face your inner world, you stop being controlled by it. Once you name your patterns, they lose their grip. Once you own your darkness, no one can use it against you. This is the initiation every liberated mind must undergo, and it has no shortcut. It requires radical honesty, the kind of honesty that burns, that ends relationships, that leaves you alone in the middle of the night questioning everything you were told to believe. And yet it's also the moment when something sacred begins. You stop performing. You start being. You stop asking, "Who should I be?" and begin asking, "Who am I?" when no one is watching. This is not self-help. This is self-truth. And it's dangerous because a person who knows themselves can no longer be manipulated. So how do you do it? There is no single path, but there are tools, practices used by seekers, mystics, and rebels across cultures and centuries. Journaling, not for productivity, but for confession. A raw dialogue with the parts of you that have been silenced. Shadow work, exploring the traits you deny, reject, or despise, and tracing them back to their source. Meditation, not as an escape, but as a mirror, a way to observe the mind without identifying with it. Inner child work, reconnecting with the younger you, the one who still remembers what it meant to feel fully. Authentic connection, conversations that go beyond small talk, that challenge your masks, that allow you to be seen. Solitude. Real solitude, time away from noise, away from roles where the false self can dissolve. You don't need to master all of them, but you must choose something. Because awareness is not enough. It must be lived. This rebellion must happen in the body, not just in the intellect. You must sit in the discomfort. Let the old stories rise. Let the grief spill. Let the shame tremble. And stay, not to analyze, not to fix, but to witness. Because witnessing is how the spell breaks. It's how you reclaim the parts of you that were stolen by fear, guilt, and conformity. It's how you become whole. And slowly, so slowly, you begin to feel different. You no longer panic when a dark thought appears. You listen. You no longer chase validation. You validate yourself. You no longer fear solitude. You seek it. You begin to realize that the self you've been searching for was never lost, only buried. And from that place, grounded, clear awake, you can begin to live. Not in reaction, not in compensation, but in truth. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "You must become who you are." Not the version you were told to be, not the version that pleases others, but the version that has always existed beneath the noise. That is the rebellion. And you won't find it on a podcast, or a productivity hack, or a 10-step plan. You'll find it in the moment you stop running, the moment you sit in the dark and say, "I'm ready to meet myself." Not to judge, not to fix, but to understand. Because only then can you begin to write your own script, to live on your own terms, to wake up to a life that is truly yours. Horson Anbeo. What if everything you feared in your mind was the very key to your liberation? What if the monsters, the madness, the chaos you've spent your life avoiding weren't signs of your brokenness, but invitations to wake up? What if the voice you call anxiety is your soul screaming through the cracks? And what if the thing you've really been afraid of all along isn't your mind at all, but your power? Because here is the ultimate truth. The truth most never dare to face. You are far more powerful than you are comfortable being. You were not born to be small, obedient, numbed by screens, and pacified by self-doubt. You were born to carry the unbearable light of self-awareness, to become a conscious being in an unconscious world, and that is terrifying. It is terrifying because it means you are responsible. No more blaming your parents. No more blaming the system. No more hiding behind the mask of "this is just how I am." Because once you meet your mind not as an enemy, but as a mirror, you come face to face with your own divinity, your own capacity for creation, for destruction, for healing, for truth. This is why people stay afraid, why they never go deeper. Because it is easier to be a victim of the mind than the master of it. Easier to say, I can't help it. My brain is wired this way than to ask who wired it. Easier to distract yourself with dopamine than to sit with the sacred discontent gnawing at your chest. Easier to call it overthinking than to admit you're not thinking deeply enough. But if you've made it this far, if you've walked through the shadow, if you've begun the rebellion, then you're ready. Ready for the truth that ends all hiding. You are not your mind. Your mind is a tool. A brilliant, beautiful, dangerous tool. It can enslave you, or it can set you free. But it is not you. You are the witness. The stillness beneath the storm. The awareness that sees the thoughts come and go, but does not become them. This is the realization sages have whispered for centuries. The awakening described by mystics, monks, and madmen alike. You are not the thought. You are the space in which the thought appears. You are not the fear. You are the one watching the fear arise. You are not even the voice narrating your life. You are the silence underneath it. And once you know this not as an idea, but as a lived truth, everything changes. You begin to see that most people are sleepwalking, acting out inherited scripts, reacting to ghosts, living in psychological loops that started long before they were born. But you now have the power to pause, to choose, to rewrite the script. And it's not glamorous. It's not instant. Some days it will feel like hell. But other days, on rare sacred days, you'll feel it. A moment of clarity so piercing, it silences every voice in your head. A breath so full, you remember what it means to be alive. A stillness so vast that for once you are not at war with yourself. You'll smile, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally understand this is what it means to be human, to carry contradiction, to hold both light and shadow, to stumble and rise and stumble again, to feel fear and walk forward anyway. Because freedom doesn't mean being fearless. It means no longer being ruled by fear. And healing doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means remembering who you were before the world told you to be afraid of your own mind. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole, of integrating the parts we've banished, of transforming the chaos within into meaning, not through suppression, through acceptance. Radical, unwavering, fierce acceptance of what is. And in that acceptance, a strange thing happens. The mind stops attacking. The shadows stop chasing. The noise fades. Because it's no longer fighting for your attention. It knows you're listening now. And in that stillness, a new voice emerges. Not the critic, not the anxious loop, but the quiet knowing. The ancient intuitive intelligence that has been buried beneath the noise of conditioning. That voice doesn't shout. It doesn't panic. It simply says, you are here. You are whole. You are ready. Ready for what not to escape life, but to meet it, to walk into relationships without hiding, to pursue purpose without apology, to create not out of ego, but out of presence, to live not as a reaction, but as a revelation. And this is the gift of facing your mind. Not peace in the way the world sells it, calm playlists, scented candles, productivity hacks. But peace that comes from knowing there is nothing within you to fear, only parts of you waiting to be understood. And so when someone asks you, what changed, you won't point to a technique, or a book, or a routine. You'll pause, smile, and say, I stopped running. And in that stillness, you became someone no system can control, someone no algorithm can predict, someone no trauma can define. You became human, fully, messily, brilliantly human, not despite your mind, but because you dared to face it. And in doing so, you reclaimed the greatest power of all, the power to see yourself clearly, to walk with your shadow, to speak with your fear, to live with your whole heart awake. And now, there's only one question left. Will you go back to sleep, or will you live eyes open, mind open, soul open, for the first time and every moment after?